What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Stochastic channel. Today, we're talking some college football DFS. Week 7, the Friday 3-game slate. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you by Bet365. They have a deal for those of you in Kentucky, Ohio, New Jersey, Virginia, Iowa, Colorado, Louisiana, Indiana, Arizona, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. What you'll do is click the link below, make your first deposit at Bet365, then make a $5 wager on any game. Could be a total or a side. Whether it wins or loses, you will get $200 in the form of bonus bets. You must be 21 or older to play, 18 in Kentucky. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. All right. 3 games reduced to 3 after Memphis and USF had to move their game, but 3 good ones. And I think it's going to be pretty light on the injury front. Cross my fingers on that. We'll see. But I think this should be a pretty straightforward slate. As usual, we go behind the glass. This is our data usage tool over at Stochastic. Ton of stuff available for you. This tool, projections, ownership projections, or Sims tool. I've gotten a lot of shout outs on Twitter recently for people that have had success with that. Congratulations to all of you that have been doing awesome with the Sims tool. Means a lot to hear your thanks and see you guys succeed. So just happy for all. Let's kick this off with the worst game on the slate, Northwestern, Maryland. 11-point spread in favor of Maryland right now. They've taken some money. It's a 45.5 total. That's come down. Northwestern plays slow. They're 97th in pace. Their offense has not looked how I thought it would look coming into the year. You know, they take an FCS coordinator who ran like a gimmicky offense, and suddenly they're passing 53.5% of the time. Some of that is just the deficits they've faced, but I don't know. I was expecting more running from Northwestern. They haven't done that a ton. They have already made a QB change to Jack Lausch. He's 6,700. He showed some pretty good mobility last week against Indiana, and he has 117 yards in the ground already. He's only really played 3 games, so that's pretty good. You're looking at like 30 yards a contest. Excuse me, but 32 attempts. He's only averaging 174 yards. Some of that pretty concerning to me, but I don't know if he's going to meet a lot of resistance. I'm no Maryland fan, and I think this defense is a little suspect. They're 99th in coverage, so maybe there are some openings for Lausch. Just not a great game environment, so I won't be really trying to overinvest in this team at all, just to be completely fair. The backfield, I don't know if this is fully turned into a committee or if they were just easing Cam Porter back into action. Because, you know, he had been coming off pretty good games as far as opportunity, but then he got hurt. So he went 19 touches, 17 touches, injured, to just 7 touches. And the snaps were pretty even between Cam Porter, Caleb Komolafe, and Joseph Hyman. Hyman actually led the backfield. He had 10 touches. So I don't know if this is Porter will eventually be back to his normal role or if we're going to keep him where he is. It remains to be seen, but it at least adds some risk to this backfield. Porter's not going to project that well. Hyman could be a dart throw, I suppose. Komolafe has been kind of the third man, so not too interested. And plus, Lausch has designed attempts of 6, 11, 7. He's involved in the run game as well. So just a tricky Northwestern situation. At receiver, they're not going to throw a ton because they're not going to be playing very fast. But, I mean, a 53.5% pass rate is still usable, especially with targets as condensed as they are. A.J. Henning, 31%. Bryce Kurtz, 27.5%. No one else is above 7.5% of the targets. Just so hyper condensed. Use Kurtz, use Henning. There's no issues with them. There's nothing in their routes that suggests otherwise. It's a rotation everywhere else. Lang and Gordon split at tight end. At receiver, Frank Covey splits with Calvin Johnson. It's just a mess outside of Henning and Kurtz. So just very cut and dry. These 2 guys are awesome plays. Maryland is 52nd in pace. They also have a 53% pass rate. Billy Edwards has very good volume. His offensive line is downright putrid, so the sacks have really mitigated the rushing upside. This Maryland offensive line is 127th in pass blocking, 132nd in run blocking. Northwestern's decent in their pass rush. They're 62nd, so, I mean, they could be getting home on Billy Edwards more than we would like. So at 8K, I think he's just a middling play on this slate. There's Two other quarterbacks I would certainly prefer, but I mean, maybe you could get there. He's in the top 3. I will say that. But he's probably going to need some sort of bonus because the rushing is somewhat mitigated. He does average 289 through the air, 35.5 attempts. That's all well and good. I think he's just a middling quarterback playing this slate. A slate where I think really only one QB projects super well. So perhaps I could be talked into Edwards. Roman Hemby does not have the same workload he once did. 14.8 touches per game, 63.5 yards. His pass game role is still pretty good, so this is a little bit of a feather in his cap. His route rate is 47%. That hasn't changed very often for him. It did come down a little bit in their last game, so perhaps a slight hole to be poked, but overall, Hemby's just not occupying the same role that he did last year, which makes him a little bit of a concern. You just have backs like Colby McDonald, Nolan Ray playing a lot more than normal. And last week, Hemby, 46% of the routes. I mean, that's pretty characteristic for him. I wouldn't be downgrading his route share. It's basically him or pass because Nolan Ray's at 8 touches per game, and then Colby McDonald's at 5.8. I would rather play other cheaper guys on this slate than those two. At receiver, Caden Prather and Ty Felton both got the go-ahead. They were injured coming into this game, but should be back to normal. Ty Felton had 15 targets in 3 straight games prior to his injury-riddled most recent contest, still averaging 127 per game, every single route, no issues there. Caden Prather is the wide receiver 2. He's at 53 yards per game. He's still a good play at 4,500. They did not price him quite enough for this slate, so that's worth mentioning. Tight end, they will rotate. Dylan Wade, Preston Howard are the main 2, but you've even seen Leon Houghton and LaRon Husbands come in for like 20% of the routes here and there. So that's still somewhat concerning. The real thing to monitor with this offense is we saw Octavian Smith lose work to Shalik Knotts. Shalik Knotts jumped up to a 71% route share last game, and he had a sick catch, a one-hander in their most recent game. I didn't see an injury for Smith, and he had previously been a near full-time player. So this is something worth monitoring. And it looks like Smith had no targets. He did play in the game, just a severely reduced role. Knotts at 3,200, I think, could be worth GPP dart throws. We just don't know this third wide receiver. One thing we do know is that Ty Felton is the one. I would certainly be making a priority to play Ty Felton at 8,500. He's expensive, but there's ways to do it. Second game, we go to UNLV, Utah State. This game is a lot more interesting. The total is 65.5 points. UNLV is a monstrous team total, is 18.5 point favorites. They're not playing fast. They're at 92nd in pace, but a 33% pass rate. They've been as low as like 20% pass rate in some games, so I would expect this to drop. But it doesn't really matter for Hajj Malik Williams, who's replaced Matthew Sluka. He's efficient as a passer, even though he's not doing it often. But his mobility is excellent. He's averaging over 7 yards per carry, and he has double-digit designed attempts in every appearance this year where he played significant snaps. He's the safest QB. I'm not really sure it's close. Yeah, they could take their foot off the gas, but you'd think Williams has something to do with it along the way. The backfield is really tricky because they'll use 3 or 4 guys per game. We've seen Jaden Thomas, Greg Burrell, Kylan James, and Devin Green all handle work. It has been Jaden Thomas and Greg Burrell at the head of the committee, but not by a significant margin. So I would be a little bit worried with this, but I think those are the 2 guys you would play if you're taking the UNLV back. And honestly, I like spraying to them a little bit because the run rate's really high. They should have this game, I don't know, it shouldn't be too much of a concern. So maybe you see fewer attempts for Hajj Malik, keep him healthy, more to the backs. I would throw some darts at these guys, nothing that will be a huge priority. In the receiving game, Ricky White is starting to see more targets. They're just condensing this a little bit. They're still not passing a lot, but we've seen him in double digits in both games with Hajj Malik under center. Target share of 48%. You can certainly play Ricky White. He's not really been affected by this heavy run rate. DeJesus has somewhat been affected, only 4 targets in the last game. 5,200 is too expensive for him. You'd rather play Prather straight up. You'd rather play the Northwestern receivers, and you can't get to anyone else. They're rotating Bradley and Kane and Irving as the wide receiver 3. And Belungai is not playing a full route share either. So it's just kind of tricky to play anyone who's not named Ricky White among the pass catchers, just pure GPP guys. And honestly, I'd rather gamble on the running backs. Utah State, Spencer Petras is under center. Utah State is 8th in pace with a 55% pass rate. And Petras has positive rushing yards. Perhaps it's just not playing Big Ten competition. He's definitely not going to be someone who even looks to contribute on the ground, but him not taking sacks is important. UNLV's defense has not been all that good. Their best asset is their secondary. What that means is, yeah, he might have a harder time throwing the ball, but maybe he's not taking as many sacks. Anyway, I don't find him cheap enough on this slate. I would rather go up to the expensive guys or find my way to Lausch. He will have enough attempts to potentially like backdoor his way to a 300-yard game, so I won't X him out. But all that's at least worth mentioning. There are risks with Petrus, of course. He's just a terrible QB in general. At running back, they lost Robert Briggs earlier this year, so they have just fully committed to Rasul Faison at running back. He's coming off 2 straight games of 26 carries, and he had a target in each of those 2, so 27 touches. Herschel Turner just not really seeing anything at this point when games are slightly competitive. Faison is touching the ball like 25 times. He's 4,700. Just a complete error. I have no idea what they're doing. At receiver, this team does have a stud as well. Jalen Royals, 33% target share. He's at 99 yards per game. He's the cheapest of the studs that I like getting to. And honestly, you could pair him pretty easily with White or Ty Felton because he's 6,700. It's very, especially as we get to these cheap running backs like Faison's easy to get to. And if you're playing a 4,700 stud, like what's preventing you from playing Felton and Jalen Royals? Just not very much. Kyrese White looks like the wide receiver too. They have done some weird stuff with their routes outside of Royals, so I would be a little bit wary of this. White was at 59% of the routes last game. Otto Tia actually has been more consistent with routes, 82%. He's just been targeted less frequently. So I don't know what to do with this. At least worth mentioning. But right now, I truly am not really sure what to make of this because their prices weren't adjusted for the change, or they were adjusted for the change. White's at 3,500, Tia's at 4K. So I mean, you have slightly better routes with Tia. Hypothetically, White is more involved. Perhaps the answer is just play White because of the targets. Who cares about the routes if they're just wind sprinting? The other wide receivers, Jack Hestera, 47%. Kobe Bowen was at a handful. And Grant Page at 25%. Tight end, this has been a mess. We don't know if Brock Lane is going to play. He was at a 50+% route share in the first 3 games. Then he got hurt and he missed the last contest. Without him, they kind of just used an exact 50-50 rotation between Josh Sturzer and Will Money. I don't know if that's going to continue. And Lane coming back could render that a 3-way committee, but Royals by far the best play. He's easy to get to at his price. And then White and Tia, somewhat decent secondary plays. Last contest, Utah, Arizona State, 4.5 point spread in favor of Utah. They were up at 6.5, now down to 4.5 again. The total's 45, so not fantastic. I said this was a clean injury slate. I lied. I forgot Rising was on this slate. So my bad. Fortunately, what I would do if you're playing this slate is, and you're using a Utah QB, is put Rising in first. I'll change this on the projections. I actually have Wilson starting because I think that's more likely. I'm basically at the point where I'll believe it when I see it with Rising, but now thinking through this, for those of you making swaps, it makes more sense to build your lineups with Rising because then if he's out, you can just swap down to Wilson and you don't have to redo all of your lineups to find $200 extra dollars in salary. You know, if you go the opposite way, it's going to make things extremely complicated. But if you go from Rising to Wilson, it's not that bad. I guess what you could do is swap directly over to Levitt, but then you run into the problem. What if you already had Levitt? Anyway, Rising would be significantly better for this offense. I just have no idea if he's out there. He's still averaging like 7 yards per carry, even though he's not running as much. Wilson has been a problem. He's run really bad on the turnovers. I will say he has 7 interceptions, I believe, 7 turnover-worthy plays. He doesn't run a ton. He's only averaging 165 yards per game. Part of this is on the offense. They're not asking him to do anything. They're 127th in pace with a 45.5% pass rate. I think we should just operate under the assumption that if we do get the Rising news, it would be a rising tide lifts all boats situation. And if Wilson starts, it's kind of bad for everyone else. But Micah Bernard should be immune. He has this awesome workload. There have been reports that they're going to give Jalen Glover more touches. He hasn't played since week 1. I doubt it. Micah Bernard's averaging 110 rushing yards per game. He has decent pass catching ability. He honestly hasn't shown it as much as years prior. I think we can fall back to previous seasons and know Bernard is an excellent pass catcher. So he's my second favorite back, I would say. Price adjusted. Obviously, Scatable on the other side of this game is very good too. But between Bernard and Faison, you can very easily play the stud receivers. At wide receiver, Dorian Singer coming off a 17-target game. He's finally asserting himself as the alpha we once knew in Arizona before he flamed out at USC. Very good price on Singer. Love using him as a third wide receiver. If Rising plays, he's going to be a smash. Keithy still has route problems, but he's very involved when he's out there. I don't know if they're purposely trying to keep him limited. He had a 57% route share in the last game. He hasn't been above 74% in any game, and that was the only time he was even above 60%. So I would still have some concerns with Keithy. Roll is good, but I think I'd rather have Singer straight up. Wide receiver 2 is Money Parks. He's a wind sprinter for the most part. He's too expensive for my liking. I'd rather find my way to Singer. And then the rest of the group is a mess. They're rotating 2 receivers, Pittman, Zipper, and then they use so much 12 personnel that a lot of times the third wide receiver doesn't matter anyway. So not a ton of interest outside of Parks, Keithy, and Singer. On the Arizona State side, they're underdogs at home. Team total's bad, but Sam Levitt is a very good dual threat quarterback, 257 yards on the ground, averages 202 through the air. They are very sensitive to game script. When they're leading, they won't throw him, but he's been pretty good and he takes care of the ball. So tentatively, he's my second favorite signal caller. He's kind of right there with Billy Edwards, in my opinion. I'm not sure how this will shake out. At running back, they're finally healthier. So DeCarlos Brooks and Raleek Brown being back gives some threat to Cam Scatabo, But even with Cam Scatabo dealing with this competition, he still had 28 touches in the last game. Raleek Brown, the USC transfer, moved right ahead of DeCarlos Brooks. He had 10 touches in their last game. And one of the big things that changed with Arizona State is their routes at running back were different. Instead of Scatabo dominating opportunities, we did see Raleek Brown with a 35% route share. It also coincided with a season low, 55% for Cam Scatabo. Still very good, but just know he doesn't have that secure receiving floor it seems that he once did. Obviously, he's the best just raw projected running back. I do think it's a conversation how you construct lineups, because if you do play Faison and Bernard, you get access to elite receivers. Now, could you play them all? Sure, but it kind of gets tight with salary. At receiver, Jordan Tyson is the alpha, 26.5% target share. You can certainly play him. Nothing fishy with the routes. Number 2 is Xavier Gulleroy. I think he's a little cheap, but he's not targeted as much. 1 game above 5 targets. Did have an 87% route share, so he's easily the 2. Everyone else in a rotation, Stovall bounces all over the place. He's technically the 3, but Jake Smith, he saw 29% of the routes in the last game that cannibalized Stovall. Tight end is a rotation. Mateer plays the most, but you will still see Marqueston Douglas, Harpole, these other guys. I would rather just play some of the ancillary pass catchers for this team or just in other places on the slate than get to him. Ultimately, Tyson's way too cheap, I think. Gulleroy would be a decent GPP pivot. And then I'm probably not getting to anyone else just because those other guys are cheap enough. Anyway, that'll do it for the 3-game slate. We'll be back tomorrow with the main slate. If you have questions, leave them in the comments or reach out to me on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. And until then, good luck. We'll see you guys next time.